The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as King Charles III stood by his office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose beds. His weathered hands, marked by age spots and years of royal duty, trembled slightly as he held a cup of Earl Grey tea. The steam rose from the porcelain, disappearing into the air like the peaceful days that once seemed so certain for his family. Charles had always imagined that becoming king would bring clarity, a sense of purpose that had eluded him during his long wait as heir apparent. Instead, the crown felt heavier each day, especially now when whispers of discord echoed through the palace corridors like ghosts of scandals past. The newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, their headlines screaming about family tensions and palace sources speaking anonymously about rifts that threatened the very foundation of the modern monarchy. The king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, knocked gently before entering the room. His expression was grave, the kind that Charles had learned to recognize as bearing unwelcome news. Clive had served the royal family for decades, his loyalty unwavering even when delivering the most difficult messages. "Your Majesty," Clive began, his voice measured and respectful, "the communications team needs guidance on how to respond to the latest reports. The speculation about the Princess of Wales has reached a fever pitch, and Prince William's office is requesting an urgent meeting." Charles set down his teacup with deliberate care, the china making a soft clink against the saucer. He had hoped the morning might pass quietly, but the reality of modern monarchy meant that peace was a luxury rarely afforded to those who wore the crown. The reports about Catherine had been circulating for weeks, growing more persistent and invasive with each passing day. The Princess of Wales had always been the steady presence the family needed, her grace and dedication winning over even the most skeptical critics of the monarchy. When she married William, she brought a freshness that breathed new life into an institution some considered outdated. Her charity work, her natural way with children, and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life had made her indispensable to the royal family's public image. But now, something had shifted. Catherine had been notably absent from several high-profile events, her usual schedule of engagements suddenly cleared without explanation. The official statements spoke of personal matters requiring attention, but, in the age of social media and relentless press coverage, vague explanations only fueled more speculation. Charles walked to his desk and picked up one of the newspapers, its front page dominated by a photo of William looking tense as he left Kensington Palace. The headline read, "Palace in Crisis, What is the Royal Family Hiding?" The accompanying article was filled with unnamed sources and wild theories, each more damaging than the last. The king remembered his own experiences with media scrutiny, particularly during the darkest days of his marriage to Diana. The constant attention, the invasion of privacy, the way every gesture was analyzed and interpreted, it had nearly broken him. He had sworn that his children would never endure what he had gone through, yet here they were, facing their own storm of speculation and innuendo. William had been different lately, Charles noticed. His eldest son, usually composed and measured in his public appearances, showed signs of strain that only a father could detect. The slight tension around his eyes, the way he gripped his hands behind his back during official events, the shorter responses to journalists' questions, all indicators that the pressure was taking its toll. The relationship between father and son had evolved significantly since Charles became king. Where once there might have been tension over different approaches to royal duty, there was now a shared understanding of the burden they both carried. William had stepped up magnificently in his new role as heir apparent, but the current situation was testing him in ways that formal training could never prepare anyone for. Charles thought about Catherine, the daughter-in-law who had become like a true daughter to him. She had brought such joy to William, settling him in a way that Charles had hoped for but never dared expect. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, represented the future of the monarchy, bright and engaging youngsters who charmed everyone they met. The thought that this family unit might be under stress filled Charles with a deep sense of protective concern. The palace had always operated on discretion, the understanding that some matters remained private even for public figures. But, in today's world, privacy was an increasingly rare commodity, especially for members of the royal family. Every decision to withhold information was scrutinized, every explanation deemed insufficient by those hungry for more details. Sir Clive cleared his throat gently, reminding Charles that decisions needed to be made. The communications strategy they chose in the coming hours could either calm the speculation or inadvertently fuel it further. Charles had learned through bitter experience that sometimes saying nothing was the wisest course, while other times, silence only made things worse. "What does William want to discuss?" Charles asked, his voice carrying the weight of paternal concern mixed with royal authority. "He's requested a private family meeting, Your Majesty. No advisors, no staff. Just the family." He seemed quite adamant about the urgency. Charles nodded, understanding the significance of William's request. In a world where their every move was choreographed and their every word carefully considered, truly private family conversations were precious and rare. When William asked for such a meeting, it meant something serious was happening behind the carefully maintained public facade. The king looked out the window again, watching as tourists gathered at the castle gates, phones raised to capture photos of the building that had housed his family for generations. These people came seeking a glimpse of royalty, drawn by the pageantry and tradition that the monarchy represented. They couldn't know about the very human struggles taking place behind those ancient walls, the way fame and duty could complicate the simplest family matters. Charles remembered his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she had navigated the family through various crises over her long reign. She had possessed an almost supernatural ability to maintain dignity while addressing problems that threatened to overwhelm them. He often wondered if he had inherited that strength, or if he was merely pretending to have it until real confidence emerged. The weight of protecting his family while serving his country created tensions that few people could understand. Every decision had multiple layers of consideration: the personal, the political, the historical, and the public relations aspects all had to be balanced carefully. What might be best for William and Catherine as individuals might not align with what was best for the monarchy as an institution. As Charles prepared for the family meeting, he thought about the conversations that would need to happen. William would want to protect his wife and children at all costs, a natural instinct that Charles both understood and admired. But they would also need to consider how their decisions would affect the broader royal family, the Commonwealth realms, and the millions of people who looked to the monarchy for stability and continuity. The irony wasn't lost on Charles that in trying to modernize the monarchy and make it more relatable to contemporary audiences, they had also made themselves more vulnerable to the kind of intense scrutiny that now plagued them. Previous generations of royals had maintained strict boundaries between their public and private lives, but modern expectations demanded more accessibility, more transparency, more humanity. Catherine had embraced this modern approach wholeheartedly, sharing glimpses of her family life, speaking openly about the challenges of parenting, and using her platform to address mental health issues. Her authenticity had been one of her greatest strengths, but it also meant that when problems arose, the public felt entitled to know the details. The sound of footsteps in the corridor indicated that William had arrived. Charles straightened his tie, gathered his thoughts, and prepared to face whatever challenge his son was about to present. The conversation they were about to have would likely determine how the royal family navigated the weeks and months ahead. As the door opened and William entered, Charles could see immediately that his son was struggling with something significant. William's usual confident demeanor was replaced by obvious concern, and his first words confirmed Charles's worst fears. "Father, we need to talk about Catherine. The situation is more complicated than anyone realizes, and I'm not sure how much longer we can handle this alone." The king gestured for his son to sit down, noting how William's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. Whatever was happening with Catherine, it was clearly affecting the entire family unit that the public saw as the monarchy's bright future. "Tell me everything, William." Whatever it is, we'll face it together. As William began to speak, Charles realized that the headlines and speculation were only the beginning of a story that would test their family in ways none of them had anticipated. The conversation that followed would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about balancing duty, family, and the demands of public life in the 21st century. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows of Windsor Castle, but, for the two men sitting in the king's private office, the day had taken on a gravity that would affect not just their immediate family, but the very institution they had dedicated their lives to serving. The weight of the crown, already substantial, was about to become even heavier as they grappled with circumstances that would demand both personal courage and institutional wisdom to navigate successfully. Outside the castle walls, the world continued its normal rhythm, unaware that inside, a father and son were beginning a conversation that would ultimately reshape how the royal family approached crisis, privacy, and the delicate balance between public duty and personal well-being. The story that the headlines had only begun to tell was about to unfold in ways that would surprise everyone involved, challenging assumptions about strength, vulnerability, and what it truly meant to serve the crown in an age where nothing remained hidden for long. The first chapter of this crisis was ending, but, as Charles listened to his son's words, he knew that the real story was just beginning. Whatever came next would require all the wisdom, love, and determination that 3 generations of royals could muster. The morning light that had seemed so peaceful just hours earlier now illuminated the beginning of one of the most significant challenges the modern monarchy had ever faced. As William continued to explain the situation, Charles felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down, the way it always did when life presented moments that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. The decisions they made in this room, in this conversation, would echo far beyond these walls, affecting not just their family but the institution that millions of people around the world looked to for stability and continuity. The weight of silence that had protected them for so long was about to be broken, and Charles could only hope that when the truth finally emerged, it would bring healing rather than further division. The story was far from over, and the king knew that the chapters yet to come would test every principle and value that the monarchy claimed to represent. The conversation in the king's private office would continue for hours, laying the foundation for decisions that would reshape not just how the royal family handled this particular crisis, but how they would approach the fundamental tensions between public duty and private life that defined their existence. The morning that had begun with such quiet hope had transformed into the beginning of a journey that none of them could have predicted, but all of them would have to navigate together. In the end, as Charles would later reflect, this crisis would become not just a test of their individual strength, but a measure of whether the bonds that held their family together were strong enough to withstand the pressures that came with wearing crowns in an age when everyone believed they had the right to know everything about those who served them. The first part of their story was ending, but the most challenging chapters lay ahead, waiting to unfold in ways that would surprise them all. William's hands shook as he reached for the crystal decanter on his father's sideboard, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey despite the early hour. The amber liquid caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows of the king's private study, but its warmth did nothing to ease the chill that had settled deep in his chest over the past several weeks. Catherine hasn't been herself since the children went back to school after the summer holidays, William began, his voice barely above a whisper. At first, I thought she was just tired. You know how demanding the royal schedule can be, especially when you're trying to balance everything with being a mother to 3 young children. Charles remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back as he stood facing the window. He had learned over the years that sometimes the most important conversations required patience, allowing the other person to find their way to the truth without rushing or judgment. But it became more than tiredness, William continued, settling into one of the leather armchairs that had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. She started having these moments where she would just disappear. Not physically, but mentally. She'd be sitting at the breakfast table with the children, and, suddenly, it was like she wasn't really there anymore. The prince's voice cracked slightly as he described watching his wife, the woman who had brought such light and stability to his life, struggling with something he couldn't understand or fix. Catherine had always been his anchor, the person who could calm his anxieties about royal duty and help him navigate the complexities of public life with grace and authenticity. I tried talking to her about it, William said, taking a sip of his drink and grimacing slightly. She kept insisting she was fine, that it was just stress from the upcoming autumn engagements. But Catherine doesn't get stressed about work, you know that, Father. She thrives on connecting with people, on the charity work, on representing the family. If anything, those engagements usually energize her. Charles turned from the window, his expression grave but compassionate. He had watched Catherine grow into her role over the years, admiring her natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. The idea that she might be struggling with something serious enough to affect her fundamental nature was deeply troubling. When did you first realize it was more serious than stress? Charles asked gently, settling into the chair across from his son. William set down his glass and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Charles recognized from William's childhood when he was trying to process something particularly difficult. It was during the children's bedtime routine about 3 weeks ago. Catherine always reads to them, it's been their tradition since George was tiny. But, that night, she just sat there holding the book, staring at the pages like she couldn't remember how to read. The image of Catherine, usually so capable and present with her children, sitting frozen with a storybook in her hands, painted a picture of someone wrestling with something far beyond ordinary stress. Charles felt a deep protective instinct surge within him, not just as a king concerned about the monarchy's stability, but as a father-in-law who genuinely loved the woman William had married. The children noticed something was wrong, William continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. George asked me privately if Mummy was sick. Charlotte has been more clingy than usual, and Louis keeps asking when Mummy will be happy again. They're too young to understand what's happening, but children sense these things, don't they? Charles nodded, remembering his own children's intuitive awareness during the darkest periods of his marriage to Diana. Children possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect when the adults in their lives were struggling, even when those adults thought they were hiding it successfully. What does Catherine say when you try to discuss it with her directly? Charles asked. William's laugh was bitter and hollow. That's just it, she's become almost expert at deflecting the conversation. She'll suddenly remember an urgent email she needs to send, or she'll start talking about the children's schedules, or she'll mention some detail about an upcoming engagement that needs attention. It's like she's built this wall around whatever is really bothering her, and she won't let anyone behind it. The prince paused, staring into his whiskey as if the amber depths might reveal some solution to his wife's mysterious struggle. The hardest part is that she's still functioning. To most people, she probably seems completely normal. She's still beautiful, still articulate when she needs to be, still capable of performing her duties. But I know her, Father. I know when she smiles and means it, and when she's just going through the motions. Charles thought about his own experience with depression and anxiety during the worst years of his marriage breakdown. The way mental health struggles could remain largely invisible to the outside world, while devastating the person experiencing them, was something he understood intimately. The royal family's historic reluctance to discuss mental health openly had evolved significantly over recent years, partly due to William and Catherine's advocacy, but that didn't make facing such challenges personally any easier. Have you suggested she speak to someone professionally? Charles asked carefully. William's expression darkened. I tried bringing it up once, very gently. She became almost angry, which isn't like her at all. She said she didn't need therapy, that she was perfectly capable of handling whatever was bothering her, and that suggesting otherwise was insulting. Then, she didn't speak to me properly for 2 days. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Sir Clive entered with a concerned expression, carrying a tablet showing the latest news headlines. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but the situation with the press has escalated. There are photographers stationed outside Kensington Palace, and social media speculation is reaching unprecedented levels. Charles glanced at the screen, seeing headlines that ranged from concern to sensational. Where is Kate? Palace silence sparks health fears, royal marriage in crisis? The comments sections were filled with wild theories, each more invasive than the last. Thank you, Clive. Please have the communications team prepare several potential response strategies, but don't release anything yet. Prince William and I need to finish our discussion first. After Clive left, William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where tourists continued to gather, unaware of the crisis unfolding inside the castle walls. This is exactly what Catherine was afraid would happen. She knew that any sign of vulnerability would be seized upon and blown out of proportion. The pressure of always having to appear perfect, always having to be on, it's suffocating sometimes. Charles joined his son at the window, placing a gentle hand on William's shoulder. Tell me about the last few days. What specifically prompted you to ask for this meeting? William's shoulders sagged as he recalled recent events. Yesterday morning, I found her sitting in our bedroom at 4 a.m, still in her clothes from the day before, just staring at her hands. When I asked what was wrong, she looked at me like she didn't recognize me for a moment. Then, she said something that really frightened me. What did she say? She asked me if I thought the children would be better off without her. Not in a suicidal way, William added quickly, seeing his father's alarm. But, like she genuinely believed she was somehow damaging them by being around. She said she felt like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't, and that eventually they would see through the pretense and be disappointed. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Charles recognized the self-doubt and distorted thinking that often accompanied mental health struggles. The idea that Catherine, who was such a devoted and loving mother, could believe her children would be better without her revealed the depth of whatever she was battling internally. What happened after she said that? I held her until she fell asleep, and the next morning she acted like nothing had happened. She made breakfast for the children, helped them with their homework, attended a charity meeting via video call. To anyone watching, she seemed completely normal. But I could see it in her eyes, she was performing, not living. William turned away from the window, facing his father with an expression of desperate concern. Father, I don't know how to help her, and I'm terrified that if we don't do something soon, this is going to get much worse. But, at the same time, I know that forcing the issue might push her further away. Charles considered the delicate balance William was trying to maintain. As someone who had struggled with his own mental health challenges, he understood the importance of not pressuring someone who wasn't ready to seek help. But, as a father watching his son suffer, and as someone who cared deeply about Catherine's well-being, he also recognized that intervention might become necessary. Has she spoken to anyone else about how she's feeling? Her mother, perhaps, or any of her close friends? William shook his head. That's another concerning thing. Catherine used to talk to her mother almost daily, but those calls have become less frequent. And her closest friends from before we married, she's been making excuses to avoid seeing them. She's isolating herself, and I think she's doing it deliberately. The pattern William described was classic for someone struggling with depression or anxiety. The withdrawal from support systems, the loss of interest in previously enjoyable activities, the sense of being a burden to others, all of these pointed to something more serious than temporary stress. What about her work commitments? How has she been handling those? That's where it gets complicated, William said, returning to his chair. Her staff have been covering for her brilliantly. They've rescheduled several engagements, citing various reasons: family commitments, scheduling conflicts, minor illness. But we can't keep doing that indefinitely without people starting to ask serious questions. Charles thought about the broader implications of Catherine's struggle. The Princess of Wales was one of the monarchy's most valuable assets, her approval ratings consistently high and her ability to connect with the public unmatched. Her prolonged absence from public duties would inevitably fuel speculation and could potentially damage the institution's reputation. But, more importantly, Catherine was a beloved member of their family, a woman who had brought joy and stability to William's life and who was raising the future heirs to the throne. Her well-being mattered far more than any public relations considerations. William, I want you to know that whatever Catherine is going through, whatever support she needs, the family will provide it. The monarchy has survived much worse than a period of adjustment for one of its members. Our primary concern must be her health and happiness. William's eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for weeks. I love her so much, Father. I can't bear seeing her suffer like this, especially when she won't let me help. I keep thinking about Mother, about how the pressures of royal life affected her mental health. I'm terrified that we're watching history repeat itself. The mention of Diana sent a chill through Charles's heart. The parallels between Catherine's current struggle and Diana's well-documented battles with depression and bulimia were impossible to ignore. The pressure of public scrutiny, the isolation that came with royal duty, the constant need to appear perfect, all of these factors had contributed to Diana's struggles, and they were certainly present in Catherine's life as well. Catherine is not your mother, Charles said firmly but gently. She has advantages Diana didn't have, a more supportive institution, better understanding of mental health, and, most importantly, you. You're not the young man I was when I married your mother. You're more mature, more emotionally aware, more equipped to provide the support Catherine needs. William nodded, but his expression remained troubled. I know that intellectually, but watching someone you love slip away from you, bit by bit, day by day, it brings back feelings I thought I'd processed years ago. The conversation was interrupted again, this time by William's private secretary, who entered with obvious reluctance. Sir, forgive me, but there's been another development. Several royal correspondents are now reporting that sources close to the princess suggest there may be significant personal challenges affecting her ability to carry out duties. The speculation is becoming more specific. William's face darkened. What kind of sources? No one in our immediate circle would speak to the press. It appears to be coming from peripheral contacts, people who may have observed interactions at charity events or other functions. Nothing directly confirmed, but enough detail to give the reports credibility. After the secretary left, William slumped back in his chair, the weight of the situation clearly overwhelming him. This is exactly what Catherine was afraid would happen. Once the press gets hold of even a hint of vulnerability, they don't let go. And, now we're trapped. If we say nothing, the speculation gets worse. If we say something, we're confirming there's a problem. Charles moved to his desk and picked up a photograph of Catherine with his grandchildren, taken during a family holiday the previous summer. In the image, she was laughing at something Louis had said, her face radiant with genuine joy and maternal love. The contrast between that vibrant woman and the struggling person William was describing was heartbreaking. Son, I think it's time we consider bringing in professional help, regardless of Catherine's initial resistance. Not because we're giving up on her ability to handle this herself, but because we love her too much to watch her suffer unnecessarily. William looked up at his father with a mixture of relief and apprehension. What kind of help? And how do we do it without making her feel like we're ganging up on her? We start with a conversation involving all of us, you, me, and Catherine. We express our love and concern without judgment, and we offer options rather than ultimatums. The goal is to make her feel supported, not cornered. As the two men continued to discuss potential approaches, the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the beginning of what would become a crucial turning point for the royal family. The decisions made in this room would not only affect Catherine's recovery but would also shape how the monarchy dealt with mental health challenges in the future. The second chapter of their crisis was drawing to a close, but the most difficult conversations still lay ahead. Charles and William were about to embark on a delicate mission to help someone they loved while navigating the complex pressures of public life and institutional expectations. The weight of their concern filled the room, but so did their determination to find a way forward that honored both Catherine's need for privacy and healing, and the family's obligation to serve the crown with honesty and integrity. The story was far from over, and the chapters ahead would test their bonds in ways none of them could fully anticipate. As father and son prepared to face the challenges ahead, they carried with them the knowledge that love, patience, and professional guidance might be the keys to helping Catherine find her way back to the vibrant, confident woman they all knew and cherished. The morning's conversation had laid the groundwork for the healing that would need to come next. 3 days after William's heartfelt confession to his father, Catherine stood in the drawing room of Kensington Palace, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared out at the gardens where her children had played just hours earlier. The autumn light was fading, casting long shadows across the carefully maintained grounds, and she felt a strange sense of disconnect from the beauty surrounding her. She had known this conversation was coming. William had been watching her with increasing concern, his gentle questions becoming more persistent, his worried glances more frequent. When he suggested that evening that they should have dinner with his father to discuss some family matters, Catherine had felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The same sensation she experienced whenever she sensed that her carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of King Charles, and Catherine turned from the window to greet him with the warm smile she had perfected over years of royal duties. But, as their eyes met, she saw something in his expression that made her prepared response die in her throat. There was no judgment there, no disappointment, just a deep well of paternal concern that reminded her why she had always felt so grateful to have married into this particular family. "Catherine, my dear," Charles said softly, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "Thank you for agreeing to this conversation. I know it's not easy, but William and I are concerned about you, and we wanted to talk openly about how you've been feeling lately." The directness of his approach caught Catherine off guard. She had expected careful diplomatic language, the kind of careful circumnavigation that the royal family typically employed when discussing difficult topics. Instead, Charles was speaking to her like a father concerned about his daughter's well-being, and the unexpected kindness in his voice threatened to undo the emotional control she had been maintaining for weeks. "I'm fine," Catherine said automatically, the response so practiced it came without thought. "I know there's been some speculation in the press, but honestly, I'm just tired. The children's schedules have been particularly demanding lately, and the autumn engagement calendar is quite full." William and Charles exchanged a glance, and Catherine immediately realized that her husband had shared more details about her recent struggles than she had anticipated. The knowledge should have made her angry, should have triggered the defensive response that had become her default when anyone tried to probe too deeply into her emotional state. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief that someone else was carrying the weight of pretending everything was normal. "Catherine," William said gently, moving to stand beside her, "we're not here as representatives of the institution or because we're worried about public opinion. We're here because we love you, and we can see that you're struggling with something. You don't have to carry whatever this is alone." The carefully constructed wall Catherine had built around her emotions began to crumble as she looked at her husband's face. William, who had dealt with his own grief and trauma with such courage and grace, who understood better than most what it meant to live under constant public scrutiny, was looking at her with such tenderness that she felt her throat tighten with unshed tears. "I don't know what's wrong with me," Catherine whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I wake up every morning telling myself that today will be different, that I'll feel like myself again, but then the day goes on and I feel like I'm watching someone else live my life. I love William, I adore my children, I believe in the work we do, but everything feels muffled somehow. Like there's thick glass between me and the rest of the world." Charles guided her to the sofa, his movements gentle and unhurried. Years of dealing with his own family's various crises had taught him that breakthrough moments required patience and careful handling. As Catherine settled into the cushions, she looked smaller somehow, as if admitting her struggle had allowed her to stop holding herself so rigidly upright. "When did you first start feeling this way?" Charles asked, his voice carrying no hint of urgency or judgment. Catherine considered the question, trying to pinpoint when the fog had first begun to settle over her thoughts and emotions. "I think it started gradually, maybe around the time of the children's summer holidays. At first, I thought I was just overwhelmed by the constant activity. You know how exhausting it can be to keep up with George, Charlotte, and Louis when they're all home from school." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap as she searched for words to describe sensations that had seemed impossible to articulate. But, even after they went back to school, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. I started having these moments where I would be in the middle of something, reading them a story, or reviewing briefing notes for an engagement, and, suddenly, I couldn't remember why I was doing it or how I had gotten there. William reached for her hand, offering silent support as she continued to speak. Catherine looked down at their intertwined fingers, remembering all the times his touch had been enough to ground her, to remind her of who she was and what mattered most. Now, even that comfort felt distant, as if she was experiencing it through layers of cotton. "The worst part," Catherine continued, her voice barely audible, "is feeling like I'm failing everyone. The children ask me questions and I hear myself giving them answers, but it's like someone else is speaking. I attend meetings and smile at the right moments, but I can't shake the feeling that everyone can tell I'm not really there." Charles leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Catherine, what you're describing sounds very much like depression. It's not uncommon, it's not a sign of weakness, and, most importantly, it's treatable. Many people experience exactly what you're going through, including members of this family." The word depression hung in the air between them. Catherine had heard it applied to others, had even advocated publicly for better mental health awareness, but hearing it in reference to herself felt jarring and, somehow, final. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being the stable presence her family could rely on. "I don't understand how I could be depressed," Catherine said, confusion evident in her voice. "My life is wonderful. I have everything anyone could want, a loving husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, financial security. What kind of person feels empty when they have so much to be grateful for?" William squeezed her hand gently. "Depression doesn't discriminate based on circumstances, Catherine. You can have a perfect life on paper and still struggle with mental health challenges. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful or weak or failing in any way. It means you're human." Charles nodded in agreement. "I've struggled with periods of depression myself, particularly during the most difficult years of my marriage to Diana. Even knowing that I had duties to fulfill and people depending on me didn't make the feelings any less real or overwhelming. What helped me was understanding that depression is an illness, not a character flaw." Catherine looked up at her father-in-law with surprise. Charles had never spoken so openly about his personal struggles, and his willingness to share his own vulnerability in order to help her felt like an extraordinary gift. The isolation she had been feeling began to ease slightly as she realized she wasn't alone in experiencing these challenges. "What did you do about it?" Catherine asked. "How did you get through it?" "I talked to someone," Charles said simply. "A professional who could help me understand what I was experiencing and develop strategies for managing it. It wasn't easy, admitting that I needed help felt like admitting failure, especially given the role I was expected to play publicly. But it was the best decision I could have made." Catherine's immediate instinct was to resist the suggestion of therapy. The idea of sharing her innermost thoughts with a stranger felt overwhelming, and the practical considerations of maintaining confidentiality while seeking help as a member of the royal family seemed impossibly complex. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," Catherine said honestly. "The thought of talking to someone I don't know about all of this feels terrifying. What if they don't understand the unique pressures of our situation? What if information gets out somehow?" William turned to face her more fully, his expression earnest. "We would find someone who specializes in working with high-profile clients, someone with an impeccable reputation for discretion. And you wouldn't have to commit to anything long-term. Maybe just one conversation, to see how it feels?" The suggestion of a single conversation felt more manageable than an open-ended commitment to therapy. Catherine found herself considering the possibility, weighing her fear of vulnerability against the exhaustion of continuing to struggle alone. "What about the children?" Catherine asked. "They've already noticed that something is off. George asked me last week if I was sad about something, and I didn't know how to answer him. I don't want them to think that their mother is broken or unstable." Charles smiled warmly. "Those children adore you, Catherine. Nothing you're going through could change that. In fact, seeing you take care of your mental health the same way you would take care of your physical health might be one of the most valuable lessons you could teach them." As the conversation continued, Catherine began to feel something she hadn't experienced in weeks, a sense of hope. The fog that had surrounded her thoughts wasn't lifting entirely, but it was becoming less dense, allowing glimpses of clarity to break through. The love and support surrounding her in that room felt real and tangible in a way that emotions hadn't for far too long. "I'm scared," Catherine admitted, her voice small but honest. "I'm scared that if I start talking about how I really feel, I won't be able to stop. I'm scared that I'll discover I'm more broken than I thought. And I'm terrified that seeking help will somehow make me less capable of doing the job I love." William lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently. "You're the strongest person I know, Catherine. Recognizing that you need support and asking for it isn't weakness, it's courage. And whatever we discover about what you're going through, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this." The evening light had completely faded during their conversation, leaving them illuminated by the warm glow of table lamps that cast everything in soft, golden tones. Catherine felt as if she was seeing her husband and father-in-law clearly for the first time in weeks, their concern and love no longer filtered through the distorted lens of her depression. "If I agree to talk to someone," Catherine said slowly, "what happens with my public duties? I have several important engagements coming up, and I don't want to let people down." Charles considered her question carefully. "We adjust your schedule as needed. The institution will survive if you take time to focus on your health. In fact, it will be stronger for having a member who takes care of herself and models that behavior for others." Catherine nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. The decision to seek help felt monumentally significant, but also strangely simple. She was tired of carrying the weight of pretending alone, tired of feeling disconnected from the life she loved, tired of being less than the mother and wife she wanted to be. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try talking to someone. Not because I'm admitting defeat, but because I want to feel like myself again. I want to enjoy my children's laughter instead of just hearing it. I want to connect with the people we meet during engagements instead of just going through the motions." William pulled her into his arms, holding her close as Charles looked on with visible relief. The first step toward healing had been taken, not through force or ultimatum, but through love, patience, and the kind of honest conversation that the royal family had historically avoided. As Catherine rested her head against William's shoulder, she felt the first genuine sense of peace she had experienced in months. The road ahead would not be easy, and there would be challenges she couldn't yet anticipate. But, for the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't facing those challenges alone. The conversation that had started with such trepidation had become a turning point, not just for Catherine's mental health, but for how the royal family approached vulnerability and healing. They had chosen love over image, authenticity over perfection, and, in doing so, they had taken the first crucial step toward genuine recovery. Outside the windows of Kensington Palace, London continued its evening rhythm, unaware that inside, a princess had found the courage to admit she needed help, and a family had demonstrated that even royalty could choose healing over hiding. The most difficult part of their journey was just beginning, but they were finally moving in the right direction, together. The third chapter of their crisis had ended with hope rather than despair, with connection rather than isolation, and with the promise that tomorrow might bring the beginning of real healing. Catherine's struggle was far from over, but she was no longer struggling alone, and that made all the difference in the world. As the three of them sat together in the quiet warmth of the drawing room, they shared the knowledge that they had crossed a crucial threshold. The conversation that had changed everything was over, but the healing it had made possible was just beginning. The days ahead would bring new challenges and unexpected discoveries, but they would face them as a united family, committed to supporting one another through whatever lay ahead. The weight of silence had finally been lifted, replaced by the much lighter burden of shared truth and mutual support. Catherine's journey back to herself had officially begun, and she was surrounded by people who would ensure she never had to walk that path alone. 2 weeks after Catherine's breakthrough conversation with William and Charles, the royal family faced their greatest test yet. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the distinguished psychiatrist who had been quietly treating members of high-profile families for over 2 decades, had confirmed what they had all suspected: Catherine was experiencing a significant depressive episode, likely triggered by the overwhelming pressures of royal life and exacerbated by her tendency to internalize stress rather than express it. The diagnosis had brought relief and fear in equal measure. Relief because Catherine finally had a name for what she was experiencing and a clear path toward recovery. Fear because the treatment would require significant time away from public duties, and the press speculation had reached fever pitch in recent days. Catherine sat in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, staring at the morning newspapers spread across her coffee table. The headlines were brutal: "Where is Kate? Palace refuses to explain princess's absence, royal marriage in crisis as William spotted alone again," and, most painfully, "Is the future queen having a breakdown?" The irony wasn't lost on her that seeking help for her mental health, the very thing that would enable her to return to her duties stronger and more effective, was being portrayed as evidence of instability and failure. The same media that had praised her previous advocacy for mental health awareness was now treating her personal struggle as scandalous entertainment. William entered the room carrying a cup of tea, his face grim as he glanced at the newspapers. "Dr. Matthews called," he said gently, settling beside Catherine on the sofa. "She wants to see you again this afternoon. She says the medication adjustment seems to be helping, but she's concerned about how the media pressure might be affecting your recovery." Catherine nodded, though she couldn't quite meet her husband's eyes. The antidepressants Dr. Matthews had prescribed were beginning to lift some of the fog from her thoughts, but they couldn't shield her from the knowledge that her personal struggle had become a public spectacle. Every day she remained out of the public eye, the speculation grew more invasive and hurtful. "The children asked me again this morning why there are so many photographers outside," Catherine said quietly. "George is old enough to read some of the headlines online, and Charlotte heard something at school from another child whose parents were talking about us. I feel like I'm causing problems for everyone." William set down his tea and took her hands in his, a gesture that had become their anchor through these difficult weeks. "You're not causing problems, Catherine. You're dealing with an illness, and you're doing it with incredible courage. The media circus isn't your fault, it's the unfortunate reality of the position we hold." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sir Clive entered, followed by Charles, both men wearing expressions that suggested new developments in an already complex situation. Charles looked particularly grave as he approached them, carrying what appeared to be an official briefing folder. "I'm afraid we have a situation that requires immediate attention," Charles began, settling into a chair across from them. "Several royal correspondents are reporting that they have sources claiming to have specific information about Catherine's condition. The details are accurate enough to suggest that someone with inside knowledge has been talking to the press." Catherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had become her body's automatic response to stress. The idea that someone in their inner circle might be sharing details of her most vulnerable moments with strangers felt like a profound violation of trust. What kind of details? William asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sir Clive consulted his notes with obvious reluctance. References to missed engagements being related to personal health challenges, mentions of family meetings about ongoing concerns, and, unfortunately, speculation about professional treatment being sought. Nothing directly quoted or attributed, but enough specific information to give the story's credibility. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Catherine's journey toward healing required privacy and trust, but those very necessities were being systematically undermined by someone close enough to know intimate details about her situation. Who would do this? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Who would take something so personal and turn it into gossip for strangers? Charles leaned forward, his expression compassionate but determined. We don't know yet, but we're conducting a thorough review of everyone who has access to information about your treatment and schedule. What's more important right now is deciding how we respond to these leaks. William stood and began pacing, a habit Catherine recognized from their early dating days when he was wrestling with particularly difficult decisions. We have several options, he said, thinking aloud. We can continue to say nothing and hope the story dies down. We can issue a general statement about privacy. Or. He paused, turning to face Catherine with an expression that mixed determination with concern. We can take control of the narrative ourselves. We can share your story on our terms, in our way, before someone else defines it for us. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine's instinct was to retreat further, to protect her privacy and that of her children at all costs. But she also recognized the wisdom in William's approach. Every day they remained silent, the speculation grew more wild and potentially damaging. What would that look like? Catherine asked slowly. How do we share something so personal without compromising the progress I've been making? Charles opened the briefing folder he had brought with him, revealing several carefully prepared documents. We've been working with the communications team on various scenarios. The most effective approach would be a carefully crafted statement that acknowledges your health challenges while emphasizing your commitment to recovery and your plans to return to duties. He handed Catherine a draft statement, watching her face as she read the proposed words. The document struck a balance between honesty and privacy, confirming that the princess was receiving treatment for depression while firmly establishing boundaries around further intrusion into her personal medical information. This is actually quite good, Catherine said, surprised by how the formal language somehow made her experience feel less shameful and more legitimate. It doesn't sensationalize what I'm going through, but it also doesn't minimize it. William stopped pacing and returned to sit beside her. The question is whether you feel ready to make this public. Dr. Matthews warned that increased scrutiny during the early stages of treatment could potentially set back your progress. Catherine considered the question carefully. Over the past 2 weeks, the combination of therapy and medication had begun to restore some clarity to her thinking. The overwhelming fog that had characterized her depression was lifting gradually, allowing her to see her situation with greater perspective. I think the stress of hiding is actually worse than the stress of being open might be, Catherine said thoughtfully. At least if we control the message, we can focus on recovery rather than constantly worrying about what story might break next. Sir Clive nodded approvingly. If we move forward with a statement, we would coordinate with your medical team to ensure the timing supports your treatment goals. We would also implement strict protocols to prevent any further unauthorized leaks. As they discussed the practicalities of going public with Catherine's struggle, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. What had started as a crisis management meeting was becoming something more significant, a family deciding to challenge the traditional royal approach of silence and secrecy in favor of authenticity and openness. There's something else we need to consider, Charles said carefully. If we acknowledge Catherine's depression publicly, were likely to receive an overwhelming response from people who are dealing with similar challenges. Mental health advocacy could become a central part of your future role, Catherine, but only if that's something you're comfortable with. The prospect of her personal struggle becoming a platform for helping others felt both daunting and meaningful. Catherine had always found purpose in work that connected her with people facing difficulties, and the idea that her vulnerability might help others feel less alone was appealing. "I've been thinking about that," Catherine said. "One of the hardest parts of this experience has been feeling like I was the only person who didn't have everything figured out. If sharing my story helps even one person seek help earlier than I did, then maybe something good can come from all of this." William reached for her hand again, his pride and her courage evident in his expression. "You've already helped me understand depression in ways I never did before. Watching you fight for your mental health with the same determination you bring to everything else has been humbling and inspiring." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's voices in the corridor outside. George, Charlotte, and Louis were returning from their afternoon activities, their excited chatter a reminder of what was most important in all of their planning and decision-making. "We need to talk to them," Catherine said, suddenly decisive. "Before any statement is released, before they hear about it from someone else, we need to explain what's happening in age-appropriate terms." Charles nodded. Children are remarkably resilient when they're given honest information they can understand. They're also incredibly good at sensing when adults are being truthful with them. As the afternoon progressed, the family gathered in the less formal atmosphere of the palace kitchen, where the children were enjoying their after-school snacks. Catherine looked at her 3 young children, seeing them clearly for the first time in weeks without the filter of depression clouding her perception. George, at 10 years old, was old enough to understand that his mother had been sad and that grown-ups sometimes needed help to feel better. Charlotte, 8, was more concerned with whether her mother would still be available for bedtime stories and weekend adventures. Louis, at 5, simply wanted reassurance that Mummy loved him and wasn't going away. Sometimes grown-ups feel very sad for a long time, even when they don't have a good reason to be sad, Catherine explained, pulling Louis onto her lap while George and Charlotte listened intently. "When that happens, they need to talk to special doctors who help people feel better. That's what Mummy has been doing." "Are you going to be okay?" George asked, his mature concern touching everyone in the room. "Yes, sweetheart," Catherine said with more confidence than she had felt in months. "I'm already feeling better, and I'm going to keep working with the doctors until I feel completely like myself again. But it might take a while, and there might be some stories in the newspapers about our family while that's happening." Charlotte frowned. "Will people be mean to us because you're sad?" William knelt down to his daughter's level. "Some people might say things that aren't very kind because they don't understand what Mummy is going through. But we know the truth, that Mummy is being very brave by getting help, and that our family is strong enough to get through anything together." As evening approached and the children settled into their homework and play routines, Catherine felt a sense of resolution settling over her. The decision to go public with her struggle felt right, not just as a strategic choice but as an authentic expression of who she wanted to be as a person and as a royal. The storm of media speculation had been battering their family for weeks, but Catherine finally felt ready to walk directly into that storm rather than hiding from it. With proper treatment, family support, and a carefully planned approach to public communication, she could transform her personal challenge into an opportunity for greater openness and connection. The 4th chapter of their crisis was ending with a crucial decision made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they implemented their plan to address the speculation directly and honestly. But tonight, as Catherine tucked her children into bed and felt genuine joy at their sleepy hugs and whispered "I love yous," she knew they were moving in the right direction. The storm before the dawn was nearly over, and Catherine could finally see the first glimmers of light breaking through the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. The road to recovery would continue to have its difficulties, but she was no longer walking it alone or in secret. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one written with honesty, courage, and hope for the future. The weight of secrecy was about to be lifted, replaced by the lighter burden of truth shared with compassion and purpose. Catherine's journey from darkness to light was far from complete, but the most important steps had been taken, and the dawn she had been waiting for was finally beginning to break. 6 months later, Catherine stood on the terrace of Kensington Palace, watching the sunrise paint the London sky in shades of gold and pink. The morning air carried the promise of spring, and, for the first time in nearly a year, she felt a genuine sense of anticipation for the day ahead. The woman who had struggled to find meaning in simple daily routines was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more self-aware, and, paradoxically, more vulnerable than before. The statement they had released about her depression 6 months earlier had created exactly the media storm they had anticipated, but it had also accomplished something unprecedented. It had transformed public conversation about mental health and the monarchy in ways none of them had expected. The response from the public had been overwhelmingly supportive, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of mental health struggles and expressing gratitude for Catherine's courage in speaking openly about her experience. Today marked another significant milestone in her journey. Catherine was preparing to give her first major public speech since beginning treatment, addressing the Royal College of Psychiatrists' annual conference about mental health awareness and the importance of seeking professional help. The irony that she, who had initially resisted therapy, was now advocating for it publicly was not lost on her. William appeared on the terrace carrying 2 cups of coffee, settling beside her on the bench they had installed specifically for these morning moments together. Over the past months, they had developed new rituals of connection, daily walks, regular check-ins about their emotional well-being, and honest conversations about the pressures of royal life that they had previously handled alone. "How are you feeling about today?" William asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer from her relaxed posture and genuine smile. "Nervous," Catherine admitted, "but the good kind of nervous. The kind that means I care about doing something well, rather than the overwhelming anxiety that used to make me want to hide from everything." The difference between healthy nervousness and the paralyzing anxiety that had characterized her depression was one of many distinctions Catherine had learned to recognize through her work with Dr. Matthews. Therapy had given her tools not just for managing her mental health, but for understanding herself in ways that made her more effective in all aspects of her life. Charles joined them on the terrace, carrying what had become his standard morning offering, fresh pastries from the palace kitchen and the latest batch of letters from the public. The correspondence had increased dramatically since Catherine's public acknowledgement of her depression, with people of all ages and backgrounds sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude for her openness. "The reaction to yesterday's interview preview has been extraordinary," Charles said, settling into his chair with obvious satisfaction. "The clips of you discussing therapy have been shared thousands of times on social media, and the comments are overwhelmingly positive." Catherine had given a comprehensive interview to the BBC the previous week, discussing her experience with depression, the treatment that had helped her recover, and her plans to make mental health advocacy a central focus of her royal duties. The interview had been her idea, a way to provide context for her upcoming speech and to address lingering questions about her absence from public duties. "I've been reading some of the responses," Catherine said, gesturing toward the letters Charles had brought. "There's one from a university student who says seeing me talk about therapy inspired her to seek help for her own anxiety. Another from a mother who finally felt comfortable discussing her postpartum depression with her family. It's humbling to realize that sharing something so personal can have such a wide impact." The transformation in Catherine's perspective on privacy and public service had been one of the most significant outcomes of her recovery process. Where she had once felt that sharing personal struggles would compromise her ability to serve effectively, she now understood that authenticity could be a powerful tool for connection and positive change. William smiled, watching his wife with the kind of admiration that had only deepened through their shared navigation of crisis. "You've changed the conversation completely." Mental health used to be something the royal family addressed in speeches and charity visits, but now it's something we embody personally. That's far more powerful than any traditional approach could be. As they sat together in the morning light, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The depression that had once felt like a shameful secret had become a source of purpose and connection. The treatment that had initially seemed like an admission of failure had revealed itself to be an act of courage that inspired others. "I need to tell you both something," Catherine said, her tone becoming more serious. "Dr. Matthews and I have been discussing the long-term management of my mental health, and we've developed a comprehensive plan that I want to share with you." Charles and William gave her their full attention, recognizing from her manner that this was an important moment in her ongoing recovery process. "I'm going to continue therapy indefinitely," Catherine continued. "Not because I'm struggling, but because I've learned that maintaining mental health is like maintaining physical fitness, it requires ongoing attention and effort. I also want to be completely transparent about this with the public." The decision to continue therapy as a maintenance strategy rather than just crisis intervention represented a sophisticated understanding of mental health that impressed both men. Catherine was approaching her psychological well-being with the same strategic thinking she brought to all her royal responsibilities. Additionally, Catherine said, "I want to establish a new initiative through our foundation specifically focused on preventive mental health care. Too many people wait until they're in crisis before seeking help. I want to normalize therapy and mental health support as routine wellness practices." William leaned forward, his excitement evident. "That's brilliant. We could create programs for schools, workplaces, new parents, anywhere people face predictable stressors that could benefit from proactive support." Charles nodded approvingly. "You're talking about changing cultural attitudes fundamentally. Instead of treating mental health care as something for people with problems, you're positioning it as something for people who want to optimize their well-being. That's revolutionary thinking." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the children, fresh from breakfast and eager to spend time with their parents before Catherine left for her speaking engagement. George, now 11 and increasingly aware of his mother's public role, had been particularly supportive throughout her recovery process. "Mummy," Charlotte said, climbing onto Catherine's lap, "will you be nervous talking to all those doctors today?" Catherine hugged her daughter close, marveling at how natural these physical expressions of affection felt again. During the worst of her depression, even simple gestures like hugging her children had felt forced and disconnected. "A little bit nervous," Catherine admitted, "but mostly excited to share something important with them." "What are you going to tell them?" George asked, settling on the arm of William's chair with the casual familiarity that characterized their family's informal moments. "I'm going to tell them about how the doctors and therapists helped me feel better when I was very sad," Catherine explained. "And I'm going to ask them to help other people the same way they helped me." Louis, now 6 and full of boundless energy, bounced over to Charles. "Grandpapa, why do grown-ups need doctors for being sad? Can't they just think happy thoughts?" Charles chuckled, lifting his youngest grandson onto his knee. "Sometimes sadness is more complicated than that, Louis. Just like when you have a broken arm, you need a doctor to help it heal properly. Sometimes when people's feelings are hurt deep inside, they need special doctors to help those feelings heal too." The simple explanation satisfied Louis, but it also reminded the adults of how far they had all come in their understanding of mental health. The children had adapted to their mother's treatment with remarkable resilience, and their casual acceptance of therapy as normal healthcare had been heartening for Catherine to witness. As the family prepared to go their separate ways for the day, the children to school, William to his own engagements, and Catherine to her speech, they shared their customary morning ritual of individual hugs and words of encouragement. These moments of connection had become sacred to Catherine, reminders of what she was working to preserve and strengthen. "I love you all so much," Catherine said, meaning it with an intensity that still surprised her sometimes. The ability to feel love fully and express it naturally had been one of the casualties of her depression, and its return was a daily gift she never took for granted. The drive to the Royal College of Psychiatrists gave Catherine time to review her speech notes one final time, though she had long since committed the key points to memory. The speech was intensely personal, sharing specific details about her experience with depression while also addressing broader themes of stigma, treatment, and recovery. As her car pulled up to the venue, Catherine could see the assembled crowd of medical professionals, reporters, and members of the public who had gathered to hear her speak. The sight that might once have triggered overwhelming anxiety now filled her with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Dr. Matthews was waiting in the green room, offering final words of support and encouragement. Over the months of their work together, she had become not just Catherine's therapist but a trusted advisor on her mental health advocacy efforts. "Remember," Dr. Matthews said with a warm smile, "you're not just speaking as a patient sharing her story. You're speaking as an advocate with lived experience and institutional platform. Your words today will reach people who might never otherwise hear this message." As Catherine took the stage and looked out at the audience, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves transform into focused energy. The woman who had once struggled to read a bedtime story to her children was about to address hundreds of mental health professionals about the importance of compassion, understanding, and accessible treatment. 6 months ago, Catherine began, her voice clear and confident. "I stood in my kitchen at Kensington Palace, unable to remember why I was there or what I had intended to do. Today, I stand before you as someone who has experienced firsthand both the devastation of untreated depression and the transformative power of professional mental health care." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word as Catherine shared her journey from struggle to recovery. She spoke about the shame that had initially prevented her from seeking help, the relief of finally receiving appropriate treatment, and the unexpected ways that her personal experience had enhanced her ability to serve others. Mental health care should not be a luxury for those who can afford it or a last resort for those in crisis, Catherine continued, her passion evident in every word. It should be as routine and accessible as any other form of healthcare. We check our blood pressure regularly, we have annual physical exams, and we maintain our dental health. Why should our psychological well-being be any different? As Catherine concluded her speech to thunderous applause, she felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with such darkness and confusion had led her to this moment of clarity and purpose. She was no longer the woman who had struggled in silence, nor was she simply the woman who had recovered from that struggle. She was someone who had transformed her personal challenge into a platform for positive change. The standing ovation continued for several minutes, but Catherine was most moved by the individual faces in the crowd, doctors who were wiping away tears, patients who were nodding in recognition, and advocates who were applauding not just her words but her courage in speaking them. Later that evening, as Catherine sat with her family around the dinner table at Kensington Palace, she reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. The crisis that had once threatened to tear them apart had ultimately made them stronger, more honest, and more connected to their purpose. "I'm proud of you, Mummy," George said suddenly, surprising everyone with his mature observation. "You were sad, but you got better, and now you're helping other people get better too." Catherine's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and joy. Her son's simple acknowledgement captured everything she had hoped to achieve through her openness about mental health. She had transformed her vulnerability into strength, her silence into advocacy, and her personal struggle into a source of hope for others. The final chapter of their crisis had become the first chapter of something much larger, a new approach to royal service that embraced authenticity over perfection, connection over distance, and healing over hiding. Catherine's journey from darkness to light was complete, but her work as an advocate for mental health awareness was just beginning. As the family settled into their evening routines, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The woman who had once felt disconnected from her own life now felt more engaged and effective than ever before. The struggle that had nearly overwhelmed her had ultimately revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. The weight of the crown, which had once felt crushing in its demands for perfection, now felt balanced by the knowledge that true service sometimes meant showing vulnerability rather than strength. Catherine had learned to speak truth to power, and, in doing so, she had discovered that the most powerful truth of all was the simple acknowledgement that everyone, regardless of their position or circumstances, deserves compassion, understanding, and support when they need it most. The story that had begun with silence and secrecy had ended with openness and hope. Catherine's transformation was complete, but its impact would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and changing conversations in ways that would extend far beyond the palace walls. The princess who had found her voice would continue to use it, speaking for those who were still searching for their own path from darkness to light.